Okay. All right, so as a recap, everyone, you guys are starting right now. You guys are doing your warm-up exercises. We did just a recap from the last couple weeks. We did CSI lines. That's what we start with, right? Because most of everything you're going to draw is going to contain C, S, or I lines. If you build upon that, you then are going to do a drill of your two-dimensional shapes, right? Because the 2D shapes are the building blocks of most things. Then we go extend that into three-dimensional shapes. Until you guys really understand like perspective and how lines and the sides of the faces are parallel, the 3D shapes may be a little difficult to do freehand. That's just going to require more practice of paying attention to how things are structured and the way that the lines congregate and group up, right? Because when I'm drawing a cube, I know that these two lines are skewed. They're going in a diagonal, but they're both in the same direction, and that's how I keep my cubes very consistent, right? Two parallel lines, two side lines, right? Two diagonal, just like that, or three. Then that's how we make very good-looking cubes, okay? Then you're going to run a drill of doing, you don't have to do it that many, maybe 2 or 3, but these are what we did last week. This is your major area divisions. This is a MAD, M-A-D, major area division. This is one of the techniques that classical artists have used, not only to just compose their paintings on a paper, but from this and amongst many other types of grids like this. Another word for it is called dynamic symmetry. These kind of things, you can build really simple grids to make almost anything. Like I showed last week, you can make that perspective look like you can draw like, you know, your road, then you got your mountains, right? You can draw trees right here. From this grid, you can build upon many different kinds of drawings, okay? So we'll come back to this grid occasionally. We might not come to it too much today, but later on in the course, we will come back to that, all right? The last thing I want you to do, this is more so for warm-up to gear us right into what we're going to talk about today. The first one is just to warm us up. You're just going to do your random squiggle in the box, trying not to leave the box, but to just loosen up your wrist and really like fill that in, okay? And then you're going to do one where you're staying consistent in the direction and trying to fill it all in with one quick stroke back and forth, right? Just like that. Make sense? Okay, and so once you guys are done with that, we will begin with today's official topic. Just let me know. Good. Okay, so while you guys are still finishing that off, just as a recap as well, so far we've been going over the fundamentals of art, but in a more refined way. We've been talking so far about line, shape, and form. That was what we first covered. Then the last class we talked about space and spatial dimension. That's how 3 dimensions or how you can make things in 3 dimensions, right? So you want to start thinking about things with depth, okay? We talked a little bit about that. What we're going to be discussing today are these three subjects: value, light, and texture, okay? In order to get into that, though, I want us to go back to our overarching thing, because, again, this whole course we've been talking about the principles of what it means to be an artist, and also how art is perceived through a Christian perspective or a Christian worldview. And so a lot of the things that I'm showing you, I'm giving you guys the techniques, the practical techniques, but also talking to you more about the spiritual side and like how this applies to your life in a way. And so the very first week, we talked about the overarching way that artists see the world, right? We're feeling around and trying to discover. We're trying to understand and have a greater understanding of what we're looking at, right? Then out of the 5 key principles that we're going to discuss, we started with the first one last week. It was called mastery, right? And this is a call for you guys, as you call yourselves artists, to always strive to really refine your abilities, okay? You may feel like you're not as good right now, but that's okay. Even myself, as experienced as I am, I still have a way to improve. There's always something you can improve on. Okay, and that's something you can take across into life as well. So mastery is a very key component to it. Okay, the thing we're going to now go over today is, I believe we have authenticity. All right, so mastery was the first one. The next one is authenticity. All right, I'm going to read this for us. It says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God and what is good and acceptable and perfect." That is Romans chapter 12, 2. All right. So in art, you want to be as authentic as possible, right? You want to be able to, stay true to who you are, right? And try to be true to life in terms of recreating art. And so just as we did last week, I'm tying this all into a little bit of art history, a little bit of techniques, and a little bit of life lessons, and then a practical takeaway. What we're going to do, and to talk about authenticity, I want us to really discuss the idea that we covered this in the first class. When I asked you, can you always, and this is a question to anyone, can you always trust what you see? No, you can't. We saw that, right? We saw that as evidence of how that gray tile that we looked at the last time, I didn't have it up right now, but it tricked our eye, right? Now, there's another thing. Have you heard the term beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or that things are subjective to your perspective, right? That's, what you're seeing is something, you can question, all right, is that what the other person sees or not, right? And so what we want to do as artists is we want to train our eye to see what is true, right? And so that's what I mean by a call to authenticity, is you're not only seeing what is true, but you're trying to represent truth. And so this leads me right into the art history lesson of today. We're going to look at a little bit of what is called the realism movement, or I would say photorealism more specifically. All right. Art has many different categories. You have, art that was made for tapestries. You have art that's made for, product design. You've got architecture. That's a form of art. You have you have abstract art. You have all of these fun, cool different ways that art can permeate into many different subjects and areas. However, realism is something that really pushes the ability of the human hand and talent to its upper limits, okay? And so that's why we're focusing on realism, because there's a lot of techniques that we're going to learn today that go into what it would take to make an artwork as realistic as this. Specifically, I'm using the term photorealism because around the 1940s, 1950s, when portable cameras and things of that were starting to become more mainstream, or just cameras in general were starting to become more mainstream, and people were able to, take photos, and now that was a whole new art form as well. Now we have photographers that take a lot of the lessons we know in art about design and composition, but they're using the lens and the camera to capture true to life images. Photorealistic art is using your ability and your techniques of drawing, and a lot of the techniques we're going to go over today, to replicate that and emulate that. And that's why this all relates to that idea of authenticity. The skills that we're going to learn today are going to help us break down what we see, so that way we can then recreate it as realistically as possible. Now, a lot of the things we're going to learn today, you'll have to practice. There's things that I still am not that good at. I cannot make something look 100% photorealistic, but I can guarantee I can break down a lot of the things that make certain things photorealistic. This artist, I forget his name, but he only uses a ballpoint pen. A ballpoint pen to make these images look as photorealistic as possible. So I think that's just phenomenal and amazing. But if you see right here, you can tell now when you zoom in, you can see every brush stroke, right? What are those? Those are just simple eye lines, right? What's that? That's a C line, and they're just repeating and layering over and over again. All right? So let's go over. Yeah. That's just amazing. That looks like it could be a photo, right? Another term you might hear for something like this is hyperrealism, or just realism or photorealism. But the idea is just you're using a pencil or an etching tool or even paints to subtly add that detail of realism.
That was made by a 16-year-old.
Yeah, so it says.
Wow.
I didn't really read into that, but these are pencil sketches. You'll see something to that effect. All right. So realism. That's kind of what we're striving for today. So whatever we draw and things of that sort today, when we get into our actual practice, all right, we're going to be drawing some of the 3D shapes on the desk in front of you. We're going to be applying some of the lessons and techniques they use in realism for today. All right. Just like we looked at that optical illusion about the gray tile and everything, in order to understand what it takes to draw realism, I want us to look at this. This is a figure. You've probably seen it. It's an optical illusion. It's something that has been around the internet. It's called Rubens vase. Okay? When you look at this, and this leads into one of the concepts that we're going to talk about. All right? What do you see? All right? Just raise your hand. I'll call one of you guys. Yes. What do you see?
So I can see two things. One is like a pedestal.
What's the first thing, though, that jumps out of your...
The two heads.
The two heads. Okay. So, you see that. But I think you're right. You can... What do you see, Caleb?
A shoe.
What's that?
A shoe.
A shoe?
Oh yeah, I see a shoe.
That's not that was intended.
I could see that, yeah, but I think the more deliberate answer would be the vase versus the two faces, right? But I could see the shoe. I could see what you're saying.
Where?
Something you see.
It's like that's like the foot sticking out. But anyway,
How did he get that?
looking at these two things. Notice that all we are looking at is black and white. Okay? This is where the life lesson comes into play, right? In life, just like in art, you got to take the good with the bad, right? You can't accept that. You can't really appreciate the happy times if you haven't gone through some sad times. And when you go through sad times, you know that that's not always going to last. There will be some happy times to come as well, right? There's contrast, okay? Contrast means you're comparing two different things, two very different things, as different as black and white. That's the only way you can perceive value. Do you understand what I'm saying? Basically, meaning you can shift between those two things very easily. If you train your mind and focus only on the face, you see the face because you're providing most value to the black color, right? But if you put more value and emphasis and focus on the white section, then you will see the vase, okay? This is a technique in art using contrast and value. Now, what we're going to get into today is that value in art exists on a spectrum. There's a lot of grays, okay? And that's where in art we're able to use those tones, that value chart from the blackest of black to the whitest of white, to really mess around with lighting and shading and all of that. And that's what we're going to do today. So, everybody understand that, right? That contrast is the stark difference between two extremes, and we use that to show value. That's how we emphasize what we want people to focus on. All right. Another term that you might hear in something like this is positive and negative space. That's something that people might say. But for all intents and purposes, today we're just looking at it as contrast or value. Okay. So we talked about authenticity, photorealism, looked at Rubens vase. So let's get into a blank page. All right. Now, let's see. The very first thing we are going to do. Now, you can break up your page into however you'd like. If you need more than one page, that's okay. My only goal is that you guys have this to reference, and I suggest as well, and I'll show you a little bit, anytime you're about to start a new drawing, it'd be good to try to first thing we are going to do. Now, you can break up your page into however you'd like. Okay,
Hello,
so
Mr. Hawk.
it stopped a while ago. It stopped a while ago. All right, it's all good. There may be a portion of the video that won't be there, but it is what it is. All right, so we're continuing and trying to match the color that's above it to the chart that's below, okay?
I tried. I don't think I did it very good. This is really This box is hard to get that.
Now, another thing to recognize too, you're employing two different kinds of techniques here when you're making this chart. You're simultaneously trying to build up layer by layer the different directions, but you're also being aware that depending on what block you are on, you might need to be applying less pressure, okay? So, for something like this one, this mid-tone right here, I'm applying very light pressure, and I think I'm only going to do like a cross. I'm not doing any of the verticals, I'm only doing the two diagonals to fill that up. And the same goes right here. I think at this point I'm only going to do, you know, this diagonal, right? And then that, right? Something just like that, okay? That's very good, actually. Nice. You're going into doing texture. That's exactly what we're going to do next. So you're a little bit ahead. That's perfect, though. That's looking good. I like that you stayed consistent in your direction. Very, very good. Very good. Nice. Okay. So right here we've done our hatching, right? We've done our value charts, okay? When you draw your picture, and this is going to lead right into our next discussion, okay? If we look right up here, we've now gone over value, okay? So all of that. We've been talking about our value chart, okay? Now, this is an example of using just simple value, you can also provide depth to your scene. So, not that we're going to do this right now, but looking at how this is built up, things that are closer are going to seem a little bit more saturated because they're closer to your face, so they're a lot darker or a lot saturated with color. Things that go further off into the distance, there's a term in science, I think it's like atmospheric ambient occlusion, and where things start to I don't think that's the word. Ambient occlusion is different. But as things move further and further away from you, atmosphere is getting in the way, so it gets like a little bit more gray and less crisp and clear. And so that's why the further things get back, the lighter they seem, right? Okay? So that's just another application of value. But we're going to move on into how that affects light. All right? Looking up here, I have a couple of different ways to think about it, all right? Whatever you are drawing, now, hear me out. As you get better at drawing, you're going to figure out that lighting is one of those things that will always be a complicated thing. Even when I'm creating artwork, that's probably the thing that I fudge the most. You know, I know tricks to make it work, but if you really critiqued some of my artwork, a lot of times my lighting is either too flat or I'm not paying attention to the direction of the lighting. But essentially what I want to make you guys aware of is that anytime you're creating an object, a drawing, and you want it to be authentic to life and make it as photorealistic as possible or add some sort of element of reality to your drawing, you want to consider where the light source is coming from. Okay, so looking at this image right here, okay, notice the angle at which we're making. It kind of looks like a geometry lesson, right? I know we don't want to talk about math, but you have a single point that is making almost this right triangle right here, or like an obtuse triangle. And those lines, this line right here is the light source, and it hits it, and then it creates this long shadow. Do you see that? Because it hits there, but then that light travels straight, so it's going to cut and make that long casted shadow. Whereas if the light source was right above, it shines straight down and makes a much shallower or shorter shadow. Okay? And so, looking at that, we can see the breakdown of how the shadow gets casted. Okay? We see this line right here dividing the sphere. This shows us a clear line of, hey, the light is in this area, and the shadow starts to begin right here. But then, you can break that down even further, where this portion right in the center is kind of the core of the shadow. That's the darkest part of the sphere, because what happens with light when it bounces off of a surface, it's going to bounce here too and then bounce right underneath. And so that's when you get this reflected light underneath, okay? You don't have to really worry too much about this all that much. I'm not asking you guys to write any of this down, but I just want you to get an understanding of light, okay? And shadows. Yet again, okay? Looking at this diagram, we see what do these radial lines emanating from this center remind you of? It's something we did last week. Not just perspective, but the area divisions, right? It is. It's perspective. All these lines are going in their exact corresponding symmetrical angles, right? So it's pretty cool to see how even in this diagram, when you throw light in, light starts to behave in those same ways that we started to break up our pages. So that's why when you're practicing those major area divisions, that'll get you thinking of how lines and diagonals start to connect to one another. So when you start to add your lighting into a scene, you know, okay, if the lighting is coming from the very top right corner, the light should be emanating in all radial directions from that corner. And so you know that all the shadows will be further down to the bottom left if it's at the light is at the top right. All right. So these are good ways to kind of see how to cast shadows and how the lighting all works. All right. The lesson or the practice that we are going to do, okay, looking in front of you, all right, there should be a sphere. It is resting inside of a tape only so that it doesn't roll. That's the only reason why it's in the tape. We could draw the tape, but for now we're just going to focus on the sphere. Sophie is a little bit ahead of us, but
what did I do?
You're doing the sphere and the shading. That's what we're going to do.
Try it.
That's all right. We're going to do this all together now. So if you'd like, you can hold on to the sphere. You can move the sphere, grab it, pass it to your neighbor. It doesn't have to stay in the middle for you guys to draw this, okay? Because essentially what we're going to do, now this is where I want you guys to follow along. On that same paper that you were doing the hatching and your value chart, I want us to draw, let's do this about, yeah, we'll do it about three times. 3 times, yeah. Let's draw 3 circles, okay? And this is kind of building upon that last one that we did, or the very first exercise, remember? If you can't make a perfect circle, then just do a few sketchy lines around and around until you get something approximating a circle. For me, I'm not going to do too many because I think that's close enough to a circle. It's hard to define what a sphere is because a sphere is 3 dimensions. When you're trying to draw a sphere, it looks just like a circle, a 2-dimensional shape, right? The only way you can really tell if a circle is a sphere, if it's 2D or 3D or not, is through value, shading, and lighting, right? So in order to do that, after you have your 3 circles, okay? Sophie, pause on that first. Let's do the practice, and then I guarantee if you try that again, you'll do it a lot better, okay?
I know, that's just kind of...
The very first thing I want us to do on this first one, okay, we see where I'm pointing? Let's add the light source, and I just want you to add a light source by doing a little dot right here, okay? And you can kind of draw some lines to indicate the direction that the light is going, okay? So for me, I know my light is going this way, all right? You don't have to draw these 2 lines, but I'm just showing you where my light is shining. Based off of that, and understanding where or how the value chart looks, what color in our value chart, based off all these different things, do you think would be right here? Which part of my value chart would be right in this section right here? Would it be this? Would it be this one? Would it be this one? What about that?
No.
Yeah, it would be the brightest white because that is the closest to our main highlight source. Okay, so that area you do not want to touch at all. You don't want to add anything to it. If you do add something to it, then that's a moment where you can erase, and you can kind of, after you do your shading, you can kind of just take your eraser and just erase a little bit, and that'll provide the white thing. Okay, now we'll go the opposite direction. Because that area is the brightest, which area would have the kind of gray to dark black tones? Would it be right here?
No.
What about right here?
Yes.
Yeah, probably, right?
Yeah,
So oftentimes the way that I start to do it, and this is where we're going to do this together now, the way that I will start to work a sphere, okay, we've drawn our circle. Now I know, remember our C lines? The way that I try to do it is I cut my circle by using a nice little C like this, okay? And now, anything that is on this side of the C, I'm going to use hatching to make pretty dark, okay? All right. And then as I pass that line, I'm going to start to make it into midtones, right? So now anything that goes right here is going to be a little bit lighter than the darkest dark. And again, as I go closer to the white highlight, I'm making it a little lighter. All right. And just like that, all right? Now notice for this one, I have only done one direction hatching. To really make this defined into a nice sphere, that's when you come back and you add those other directions of those lines. That's when you start to get into the cross hatching. Okay. And
I thought
once
this would be a lot harder.
I know it is easy once you break it down into its simpler things. It's just applying those things, those simple techniques. It's applying them in unique ways that the artists fool people into thinking they're more talented than they are. There's so much that I get away with as an artist that most people will look at me and be like, "Oh, that's amazing," but in my head, I'm like, I really cheated in that. Like, I didn't do my best. I just used a little technique that made it look really good for a lot less of effort. All right, and so it's all kind of using those optical illusions and using how things relate to each other with shading, lighting, and all of that. The final thing I would do to make this really stand out as a sphere is I would make a really dark spot for where the shadow would be, right underneath, okay? So I'm going to come around and look at that and see how we've done.
I kind of drew 6 because I didn't know what we were doing, so I accidentally did 6.
Oh, you're wearing white shirt. Don't rub your elbows onto the paper.
I had to roll up my sleeves.
Yes. That's okay. You can just focus on the 3. Want to see that one?
Tilly's progress.
That's looking pretty good. It's looking good. So, can I borrow this one? So right here, if your light is coming out that way, you don't want to make that line
Fancy
too
books is in
stark,
the world.
but go over it now. If that's your darkest dark,
10
you want to start to get
sucks.
these mid-tones right around here. So this part is going to be slightly lighter
Mr. Hawk.
than this part. This part should always be a
I
little
haven't posted
darker.
videos in a while because I don't know what to post about.
And then this part, as it goes closer to the light
I
source,
usually only do
should get
bits of
a
Sunny
little lighter, a
Ontario.
little lighter, a little lighter. Make sense?
I go on YouTube and
It's actually
there's
really good.
a
Okay, which device do you use to record your phone?
my iPad.
Use your phone.
No,
Mr. Hawk.
Looking good. So yeah, so now you have an opportunity here
because I
to
also
just
record on
take your
YouTube.
eraser
Yeah, I know.
and just erase that, so like make that really.
yeah.
What you can also do is erase some of the sides right here, and even some down on the bottom, the edges.
Alexa
to the
once
Oh,
like
yeah.
went like this with her flexible roll and was eating it like
Also,
Yummy,
say
yummy, yummy.
All right.
Mr. Hawk, I noticed something about this one. If the light, if this shine thing would actually give the light would be like back here and the shadow would be out here instead.
Mm-hmm.
you're telling us
Yeah.
how to make it
I put the shining run part. If the shadow were gonna be here, the light.
There's a whole nother lesson I can give specifically about the angles of which light is hitting. For right now, I just want you guys to get the general concept of understanding lighting direction and using value to indicate that. All right. So let's practice that again, but I want you guys to try adding your light source in a different spot and try to just do it yourself. So go ahead. I'll give you guys a few minutes. I'm going to do it with you. Okay. But you're practicing that same kind of technique, right? So you focus where the light source is. Then you try to use your C line to cut and carve your sphere to kind of show where the shadow and midtones would be. All right. You know that top portion is going to be the brightest, the bottom is going to be the darkest, and you just start adding in your cross-hatching values. All right. Now, as you guys are doing that, I am going to pull out something here for you to see how I've used cross-hatching in the past to make some really cool looking stuff. So, this is an example of using just a regular ballpoint pen and a lot of the techniques I just showed you, and I was able to make something look, it's not photorealistic, however, look what I've done for this ball. Exactly what we're working on right now. So exactly what you're doing, I've done it before, and I do employ this in all of my drawings, right? Knowing that the light source was hitting right there, I know that it's darker within the hand. This was during Inktober, so I did other kinds of drawings. Let's see. It's not necessarily that. This is another cross-hatching, right? But I'm using it a little more stylized. That's not that. No. No cross-hatching, just Jack Sparrow. This is a good one. So, she's holding a lady holding an ornament. For this one, I went very delicate to try to make two subtle light shines, right? If you notice, there's a direct light shimmer right at this point right here, but then there's also a subtle shimmer happening right here. So it's almost like there's two light sources hitting it. And I imagine like she's holding it by like a tree or something, and there's multiple lights, right? But again, I'm using my cross-hatching. What I started to do in this one, and this is a variant of cross-hatching, this is not something I expect you guys to do today. You can try practicing it with your sphere if you want to. But again, don't try to overcomplicate it. But look here. If you notice on her hand, since I know that her hand is a three-dimensional object, I'm applying cross-hatching into 3 dimensions. So all of these hatching techniques, notice they all have a C curve to it, right? The curve right here, the curves right there, the curve right there. Do you see how they're intertwining? They're doing the same cross-hatching technique, except every cross-hatching is kind of like a cross-hatch of a bunch of C lines, kind of doing that. So it keeps it retains the shape, the three-dimensionality of it, but it also keeps it with that dynamic kind of value shading, right? So those are just practical examples of how you can apply these things. One last one. This is my Super Saiyan Jesus that I like to draw. It's an anime. If you ever watched Dragon Ball Z, it's a Japanese anime cartoon, and I made Jesus into a Super Saiyan. I thought it looked really cool. But again, I'm coloring that in just using hatching. Okay. This one I didn't do much.
His hair looks crazy.
Yeah, that's the anime style. But I didn't do much cross-hatching for this one. So this is an example of using value, but I did it with a marker or a Sharpie marker, a thin fine point marker. And so I was able to just, if you keep the lines closer together with markers, you can get the same dark black value. And the wider you separate them, that's when you get like gray tones and white tones, right? So depending on the medium you use, you might have to just experiment with value. This is another cross-hatching one, okay? So all of this stuff is very practical, pragmatic. It's stuff that you will use no matter what you're drawing, right? Depending what you're drawing. Because using other mediums would require other types of techniques, but essentially, whatever medium you're using, you should generate a value chart. So if you're using paints, generate a value chart of paints that run the gamut of your darkest to lightest, okay? Anytime you're going to hear value, you're thinking of, black to white, and grays in the middle, right? Next week, I believe, we are going to cover a little bit of color theory. Okay, so we're going to talk about how color integrates in all of this as well as we get into further along. All right, let's do that last one. All right, this one's going to go down. All right, that's the highlight. These are my midtones. These are my dark. All right.
How much longer do you have?
We've got about a half hour.
Oh, good. Mr. Hawk,
Yes.
Oh,
I had an idea.
you
I
said
was-
What's that?
Mr. Hawk.
No, she said Mr. Hawk.
I'm going deaf.
Okay, anyway, I was thinking I could use this for my
Yeah, how dare
project.
I?
I was thinking I
What
could
is
use
it?
this for my project for shading.
Yes, especially if you're going to do the earth.
Hands. Yeah,
Yep.
with earth, I was thinking that'd be good.
No, not you.
This is good practice for that.
Well, yeah, because look, and I want you guys to see right here. If I'm drawing a hand, right, and I have, the fingers, right, I'm just going to do a really rough-looking hand right here,
Cool, me.
okay? If that's my hand, yet again, I'm treating my hand, this drawing as a three-dimensional shape. So I look at the light source, okay? I'm looking at my hand here. The light is coming from this light source, hitting right here. I know that all the shadows are going to be on the left. So now, doing my hatching, I'm only doing shadows along the edges of the left-hand side. So
Yeah, I can do that.
using this technique, you can start to make your drawings start to look a lot more three-dimensional,
And
right?
realistic.
And realistic. Again, going right back to the whole message of today, that's how we're trying to stick to authenticity. We're trying to make things look true to life. We're using our eyes to dissect and analyze the world around us. We're breaking things down into smaller, easier to understand things. And one of the ways we do that is by understanding how light affects and wraps around the things around us. And we replicate that by using value charts. Value is really just you applying focus and attention to certain areas, right? You're showing what is valuable to you, right? That's a good way to think about it. Okay, so if we're all good with that, we will go on to the final thing that I had today, and then we will shoot right into some practice, and then we'll have some time to apply some of this stuff to your own drafts that we've been working on. All right, so let's see, we did 3D shape, crosshatch, value, light source. The next thing, I'm going to do this. Nope. Nope. I will just do it on a new page. Okay. All right, now, the final thing. This next thing that I'm going to show you, it has its uses. It has its place. I won't say that it's not important, because texture is definitely important in artwork, but you can get texture into an artwork through a variety of means. You can get texture into your artwork by simply crumpling up a portion of your paper like this, and when you draw over it, you know it's going to have kind of a rough and tumble look to it, right? That's one way. Don't worry about that. What we're talking about texture is using simple repeated patterns to mimic how something might look. The best way to think about this, okay? Now for this exercise, Natalie did a really good idea. I think I'm going to steal that idea. If you just do a large square and break it up into like nine boxes, right? Within each box, we're going to do a different kind of texture, all right? The very first one, I want you to think of how would you show the scaly skin of a dragon, what would you do? When I think of that, I think of just a bunch of row of C lines to make it look like it's scaly, okay? So when I'm talking about texture, I'm talking about repeated line patterns that mimic how something feels, okay? So that's how I would do something like that. Let's see, if I wanted something to look like it was a fabric or something, or it had a lot of threads, one of the ways I can do is kind of do a pattern of a bunch of lines, but
Cross-hatching, sort of.
crosshatch, but not all of them, right? Like I'm going to do a little here, a little bit right here, right? And this makes it look almost like it's threaded. It has a lot of fibers to it, right? But I'm not hatching. I'm not trying to make this into a value thing. I'm just using the lines for texture. Just like I said in that portrait right back there, I was using the lines mostly for texture, all right? You can do this in a variety of ways. Let's see, if I wanted to show wavy and watery texture, how would I do that? You can use one of the simple lines we've been practicing. I'm going to give it to you. Just do a bunch of S lines, right?
That's what I was thinking.
If you just do a bunch of S lines like that over and over again, even if they start to go opposite directions, you can start to indicate the texture of flowing water. Or if you wanted to show hair, right? This next one, do just a bunch of hair or a bunch of threaded lines going in one direction or emanating from one point, and you could kind of make something look almost like silky hair. All right, there's a whole philosophy on how to draw hair that I'm not doing here. No. That's neither here nor there.
Or hair.
Or hair. All right. So, but do you see how texture is also incorporated in this, right? Because you can use texture to indicate different areas of value, but texture has its place for certain things. I would say don't think about texture until you've already applied value. So, for example, if I was doing my sphere and I did my shading, right? I made, my shadows right here, right? And for all intents and purposes, I'm going to do the smudge technique because I'm going to apply some texture on top of this, okay? So, and you don't have to do this one, but I'm just showing you the application of texture. After I've added my value and my shading to make it look like a sphere, right? Make this part dark, right? I can then go in with my pencil, and let's say I wanted this to be not a sphere, but a rock. I can start adding like little jagged lines and stuff to make it start to look very rugged and rocky and rough, right? So that's me using texture and applying value, or applying value first and then using texture to add more, details to it. All right? The same thing goes with the whole hand technique. After I've done, where was the other thing that I drew? After I've done that with value, that's when I can then go in and start to add the lines that, make up our skin, and, start adding the lines that make up like the bends of our fingers, right? That's when you start adding the texture, you start adding the detail. Okay? Now, if you really get into hyperrealism, when people do skin textures, they are literally going down to the minute follicle. I mean, literally taking a very thin brush and doing all those little dots and little hair follicles, using very thin paints to make like highlighted hairs. When you go to photorealistic painting and drawing, no detail is left unturned. All right? So that's why I'm saying with texture, you can really expand that in a variety of different ways. But let's finish off that chart of texture. Try to fill out the rest. Let's try different ones, like maybe try like a rocky looking texture, something like that. Or try, let's see, what else would be a good one?
Grass.
Yeah, a grassy texture, right? Grass would be like a couple of like these thin looking blades, right? grass also probably comes up in a variety of different angles, right? So you want to do some variation in the way that you're making your grass kind of go in different directions. All right?
Mr. Heck,
Yes.
just about like on a rock, if you have one ridge and then another ridge after that, the second ridge will have a darker shadow.
Yeah, you're right. And you're smart. You're watching where the lighting is wrapping around things. So yeah, if your thing has a lot of jagged edges and a lot of rough texture, then yeah, you're going to have a lot more shadow. And the same thing goes with those scales, right? Like if I'm adding a whole row of scales, I know that when I'm coloring this in, I need to keep considering that the lighting probably only covers a portion of the scale, a portion of that, right? There's still a directionality to it. Okay?
Ava. You flicked it at me. Really?
There you go. That's a fence. Let's see.
Oh, I see it. I see it.
Oh, it's good.
I see it. Let me try it.
That's me in class all the time. Always falling off the chair.
How would you make lighting on fabric, though?
That is a whole nother discussion, but because fabric, cloth, the way clothing folds and falls on bodies and stuff like that, I can show you a little bit of it, but that's just going to require a lot more of paying attention to how clothing falls and drapes on. If you really want to practice that, I would take like a blanket and just fold it or let it drape over different objects. Or take it like a little blanket, take a small object, let it rest over it, and just pay attention at the natural curves and
I've
folds,
seen,
okay?
Like pictures, like how you do a wavy line and then you do like shadow off of it.
So with those are really fun, simple techniques. Like I know that one with the wavy line like that, and then you can do something like this and that to like make it look like it's a, fabric or something.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that
cool too.
it's a quick and easy way to kind of do it, but it limits you in understanding the real structure of what you're drawing. That's why everything I've taught you guys, I've been trying to show you how we build up from the very basic, so that you can have the skills to really understand this yourself. All right, so we good with texture? Everybody, we've filled up our texture chart.
I have not yet.
Now, what's really cool, and this is what I love about art, is that you don't have to make up every texture. You can use your skills as an artist to pull texture from nature. There's a thing where, I forget what they call it, but if you take a piece of paper, you put it on top of something and then run your pencil over it, you can capture whatever etching was underneath it. If you wanted, you could always do that to get texture from the natural world. If you wanted to have something that had a rough texture, take your paper, go out onto a rock, scuff it up over the rock a little bit, and then draw on top of that after you flattened it, right? Or like I showed you, if you wanted something to be a little rough, it's okay, have fun with it. If you're creating an artwork that needs a certain type of thing, experiment with different ways. That's something we're going to cover in the very last class. I'm going to talk to you about the process of art and creation, and a lot of it is experimentation. A lot of it is just playing with new ideas, new materials, all of that. So we have that. Now that we've finished, as a recap, so far we actually covered a lot today. So we've covered hatching. We've covered value charts, okay? Because hatching is the method to build value. Then we use value in conjunction with our understanding of lighting to showcase depth and variety of shape and tone, right? Then you can apply texture to that to add much more variety and much more realism. Ultimately, I think you guys, whenever you have a chance, and if you're bored, maybe you've got artist block, you don't know what to do, open up your sketchbook and just start sketching things in front of you, but use these techniques to keep practicing. Keep practicing your hatching techniques. I am oftentimes, if I'm just doodling or I'm not really sure what to draw, I'll just start drawing random objects. It doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're just constantly training your mind to draw these lines in certain formations so that way you can do it more and more consistently. All right? Make sense?
Sometimes I just don't have time to do it every day, though.
No, I know. And look, I'll be honest. Do I do this every day? No, but before I started drawing, to kind of just get out of my head, I'll do a couple of practice sketches and doodles first. All right?
Would making like air bubbles underwater be the same as making spheres?
Making air bubbles underwater?
You know what I mean? Like how
Well, I mean, it is a sphere. It is a bubble.
would you make it the same way?
So when you're dealing with something with the material, and that's something we haven't, I don't know if I'm going to cover it, but I guess I'll address it here. Depending on what the material you're drawing is, it might require a different approach to how you apply value and shading. Like, especially if you're dealing with like a soap bubble or something like that, the way light bounces and curves around it looks subtly different than looking at a normal sphere that's solid and opaque, right? If you can see through it, then you're dealing with light bending, and that's a whole nother complicated conversation about how light refraction and reflection and all of that.
Yeah. You have a long, instead of like with the sphere, you have like a little one that is like long.
Mm-hmm.
Because light bend.
Where did I put my notes? What did I say I was going to do next?
Water, like in our
Nope. All right, so with that being said, we have the last 15 or so minutes. Let's go ahead and use that time. I want you to now, based off of the things that you have been sketching and practicing in class, I want you to apply every lesson we've learned so far. Okay? We learned, number 1, about gestures and just sketching, the process of sketching. I want you to just kind of try your best to sketch and define your shapes, right? So let's do this. I'm going to do one here with you. Okay? So let's say I'm going to draw I'll do this guy right here. He's not Joe Biden. This is the Doctor. It's from Doctor Who, my favorite BBC sci-fi adventure program. I'm going to draw him. If I'm trying to draw this, and now I want you guys to just start with your own drawing, but I'm showing you the process that you should now do for the next 15 minutes. We're starting with what we learned the first week, which is just sketch. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm not trying to make the lines exact. All I'm doing is trying to discover where my proportions are. So I know my lines are right there. So that means the 2 eyes. I've got these things. Now notice, I'm very loose. I'm not really, and look, even here, I'm literally letting my pencil just move around as I'm trying to find the shape, right? See, I'm not even holding it very properly. I'm having fun with this. I'm letting my hand discover it, all right? And then little by little, as I start developing context on the page, that's when I start becoming more decisive and then starting to add structure, right? And I'm rushing here, so I'm not really doing a very good job, but take your time when you start doing your more defined shapes, right? And now, I do want to show you something right here. Notice that when I did the shape of the head,
square.
immediately, what did I do to find where the eyes go? I made a major area division. I split it down the middle to find the center. Then I split that horizontally to find the line that the eyes would go on.
My dad told
Okay.
me that a lot of people normally eyes too high.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's hard to line it up. Like I did that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like-
Yeah, people forget how much space needs to be up there for the eyebrows and the forehead if you're drawing a face. Yeah. So, that's that. The nose. Okay. Then I can do my hair here. Right? And now, today you can erase. So, after you've sketched, if it helped, erase some of the sketchier lines after you've defined it.
And then I can still see the groove, so I go over it harder and better.
Yeah. But the goal today is, after you sketch your piece and after you outline it and refine the lines, you're then going to shade it. So afterwards, I want you to pick a direction where the light is going to come from, and then I want you to use the hatching techniques. But I'm not going to do that yet until I have a really nicely drawn shape. So if you're still watching up front here, you see how I'm erasing. I fix my shape. Erase. I fix the shape a little bit. Okay? Yes?
I made this like try to be more how.
Yeah. So
More light and probably be bigger spot.
we didn't touch upon it too much, but when you're doing that, you really want to make sure that you're blending those different sections. You don't want it to be too stark of a contrast between the darkest dark and the whitest bright highlight.
So that's when like smudging comes in.
You can do that with smudging, but remember I said just use your pencil to try to blend those areas. So literally, here, so come up. So you see that stark line right here that cuts like that, and this stark line. Number one, let's erase a little
I
bit right
tried
here.
to erase it.
And then right here, you're going to just add a few extra layers to really bridge the gap between this dark part and this kind of mid-grain, this mid-tone. Okay?
Oh, I see.
So you do stuff like that. There you go. You see? And so that's starting to look closer and closer together. Nice. All right. I'm going to continue my drawing here. All right. We got about 9 more minutes, guys.
Is this good? I fixed.
So again, that's too stark of a highlight, so it looks like it looks strange. I would prefer it if you erased, because since you've already added a lot of etchings there, or like a lot of the pencil. So that part you might even want to erase a little bit further, and then walk it back with very light right here.
Mine is my pencil's dull though. So.
Sometimes the dull pencils work better for that smoothing. Yes.
How do you draw like a mouth?
Mouth can be drawn in a number of ways. What kind of mouth are you trying to draw? Is it a female, male? Okay. So mouth, you know that you're at its basic shape. It's something like that with a little divot for, right there. You have your corners of your lip. The corners usually are darker, right? And then lips typically have, the line right there, right? There's a number of ways you can break that up, and this is not really part of the lesson, but I'm showing you. It's not always about the lines you draw, especially when drawing like features. Sometimes it's the lines you don't really leave in, right? So you notice how with that, I'm really defining these corners and this middle portion, but right here I'm getting very thin, and then again, I'm kind of thinly, lightly outlining, and then even right here, just thinly, like that. Do you see? And so that's one way. If you want to get very voluptuous lips, depending on how, who you're doing. Like for most guys, I would just do something like this. Like that. I wouldn't even do the top portion. I would just do kind of the bottom like that. That's what I would do for men. If I was doing a woman, depending if she's wearing makeup or not, I would kind of accentuate those curves a little bit more. I would definitely do that top portion, and I would round that top like that. And then I would also make the bottom a little bigger, like that. You see? I hope that answers your question about lips. And the same thing applies with shadows and everything. If lighting was coming from this direction, then I know all my hatching would be right down here. I know that the highlight would be kind of right there.
Mr. Hawk,
Yes.
what am I supposed to be drawing? What am I supposed to be?
So you guys should be drawing the draft of what you've been trying to sketch. Okay. We only have about 6 more minutes, so you might not finish it all. But I do want you to practice this at home. All right. I'm going to keep sketching my thing right here.
Can I have a new piece?
Yes, of course.
Is it okay if I do a comic?
Yeah. Look, like I said, I want you guys to take the lessons we've been. Do you need one?
No.
Okay. I want you to take the lessons we've been learning, and I want you to try to apply it to your own types of projects. All of this artwork and all of this fun stuff, it doesn't mean anything unless you can apply it to something that means something to you. Yes.
Can I use color to what I'm drawing, or do I have to keep it blank?
For today, just stick to black and white. Just stick to pencil, just graphite pencil. You may use like a marker or a Sharpie if you want to really test yourself. Try doing it with a pen. That's when things get really hard, because with a pen it's very difficult to control the value. Yes.
Do you have a ruler that you use?
We're not using rulers yet. There's a time and place for ruler. I want you guys getting used to doing what is called freehand. Okay? The reason why, Caleb, is because those tools are good and there's a time and place to use it, but the ability to be able to approximate straight lines just by freehand, I want you to practice that. Okay? Because even now, I can't do a straight line, but that's pretty straight, right? It's maybe skewed or angled, but if I had to draw something, I know I can just do, right? And now I have a pretty solid cube, okay? And I want you to practice that. And so probably on the last day when you're working on your final project with us, I'll let you use whatever tools you need. But for this one, just practice as best as you can. While you guys are working on that, any questions so far? Anything I can help with on your stuff?
I need help with thumbs. I have a little bit of a hard time with them.
Okay. So again, remember,
Also putting things in the center.
just because I've now said you can erase, I don't want you to forsake the process. Remember, the process is sketching first, right? So you're just feeling around the general shape of the object, all right? So that's where you start to try adjusting. Don't erase yet. Adjust, make your changes. And then once you've got the definitive shape, that's when you go back and erase all the sketchy lines. All right? So I saw what you were doing right there, Sophie. If you keep doing that, you're going to keep false starting.
Yeah, so I
Right.
did what you said. You made it before I erased it.
Exactly. Like push through it. Even if it looks slightly weird and ugly in the sketch form, that's okay because you have to start from someplace. Once you have that, then you can see the full scope of what you then need to refine. All right, and that's when you can start to adjust the sizes. For your case, you're trying to draw the fingers and thumbs. The sketching portion is where you're really figuring all of that out. Okay, and I'm still working on mine here, but I didn't really refine mine all that much, but notice I'm now adding my shading. I'm doing all my shading to one side because that's where the light is coming from, right? Yep. Bring him back. Okay. And I'm rushing on this, so I'm doing a real rough job here. But do you see kind of what I'm doing? How now I'm adding like the shadows, I'm adding all these details. Just like that. All right. Now, I didn't really get into this with us today, but when you are shading your actual drawings, I didn't do it much here. And we will get into this in later lessons. Stay consistent in your angle, and that'll really elevate your drawing. Notice how this looks very chaotic. Had I just simply done all of my hatchings in one simple direction, no matter where they were, and they were all just angled in the same direction, there would be a certain uniformity to this that people would be like, oh, that's such a good drawing. And you're just like, it was a sketch. It wasn't my best, but because
I know,
it
that
looked...
looks good.
But because it was all together, yeah. And what I like to do when I'm really just messing around in my sketchbook, I will go ahead after I've done my sketch without erasing anything. I'll just take a pen or a marker, and that's where I would then go in and really define those shapes. Do you see how I'm doing that now? And so that's where I can really refine those lines. Right? All right, guys. It is 4:30. I think we are good, but let me close this out in prayer. And next week, like I said, we are going to start to learn about color theory. We're going to cover Impressionism and gesture, as well as Impressionism. So we're going to look at the works of Van Gogh, some other Impressionists. We're going to talk about them in art history, and we'll cover another portion of the artist way that I've been talking about. All right, so let's just close it out in prayer. All right. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to come together and learn about art and creativity and how we can use the talents that we have, the talents that you have gifted us, to see the world more clearly, to understand things more deeply and intimately, Lord. And we just ask that you continue to guide us and bless us in the utilization of our skills and our talents so that we may bring glory to you always in everything that we do. So I just ask that you place a hedge of protection over everyone in this class, Lord, as they travel home tonight. And we just thank you for all of your wonderful mercies. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. Thank you, guys. I will have all of these videos edited, so you should be able to see them. This one, I got to go back and see how much of that got cut. Because I remember hearing the thing pop, like beep, and then I don't remember how long I was talking afterwards.